Hi, everybody. Welcome, welcome. I am taking a moment here at the beginning just to tune into your lovely faces. Whoever wants to have their camera on to say hi, that's awesome. If you don't, no problem whatsoever. I just love taking a moment here at the beginning to tune into your beautiful faces. Hey, guys. Hey, thank you so much for being here. Yay. Oh, good. So many familiar faces, some new faces. Oh my goodness. We got some old school people up in the house. I've known some of you for 20 years. It's amazing. Oh, yay. I'm honored. Thank you. That feels good. Okay. So, as everybody settles into the space today, we are going on a journey together. It is inevitable. This is astrology, and it is a naturally psychoactivating process. So, that being said, I am really big into regulation and co regulation. And essentially, what that means is I just want each of us to do our very best to take care of ourselves. So, what I'm asking you to do is be as present as you possibly can be, given the reality of your life today in this moment. I don't want you to be as present as possible in some like ideological way of perfection, but I want you to be as present as possible that is the most kind and loving version for yourself, given with whatever you are dealing with today, whatever is going on in your life, in your body, in your relationships, in your emotions, because that is how we best take care of ourselves. And that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about today in so many different ways. So, as we continue to settle into the space, just get whatever it is you need to feel good. Thank you so much for the honor and pleasure of coming to hear me speak today and wanting to hear what we have to say about the astrology of our times. This talk is called Where is the Line? The Saturn-Neptune threshold of 2024 to 2027. And it is the question, where is the line? If you have found it, please let us know, because I think we are all searching for it desperately on some level. I am going to attempt to answer this question in a myriad of ways today. But for me, most simply put, my line is my mental health. That's my line. That's my ultimate line, is my mental health. And I'm going to be sharing with you all of the incredible pearls of wisdom that you all have given me over the last 18 years of being a professional astrologer and the last 13 years of being a psychotherapist in private practice. Essentially, you pay me really good money to listen to you. And I spend about 90 to 95% of my life listening to all of you, from people from all around the world, all walks of life. At this point in my journey, I think it's safe to say I have worked with almost every kind of human being imaginable. And it is one of the greatest joys in my life that I get to have the privilege and honor of listening to you. And so today, I'm essentially going to report back to you what you all are telling me, so that you can hopefully hear yourself feel seen, understood, and reflected back, but all through the lens of archetypal astrology and depth psychology. So every last thing I share today, all of the words that come out of my mouth, all of the stories I share, all the examples that I give, even the structure and format of this talk will be honoring the current Saturn-Neptune conjunction that we're all here to hear about, because it's the greatest astrological alignment of our times. And I feel deeply called to do my best attempt to describe to you what I think is the most challenging astrological combination that humanity can go through on a collective level. So I'm going to break down here in a moment what exactly that means. But first, I want you to have something nearby that really makes you feel good. Mine are photos of my two kids. They ground me, they anchor me, and they make me feel good. So, whatever your version of that is, I would love for you to have that nearby, because inevitably, when going into this talk, there are going to be some hard, challenging, dark, and at times maybe even overstimulating things that we need to talk about, because that's what's going on in the world today. And it's unavoidable. And so it's so important in our regulation that we know what it is that anchors us back into the feeling of safety and goodness, because that is when we learn and grow the best, is when we feel safe and when we feel good in ourselves. Okay, as we continue to settle in, we are currently in an eclipse right this very moment. There is a solar eclipse going on right now as we give this talk. And essentially, whether we know it or not, we are currently doing a ritual together. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what I think that ritual is, but I always love starting with having an intention. And so each of you can just take a moment here as we kind of just breathe in and out together around what your intention is for today. If you could have something come out of this talk for you, what would it be? And kind of set that intention for yourself. And I want you to imagine putting that intention into the palm of your hand and open it. And when you're done having the intention, just release it out into the field so that it can be here in the space with all of us, and that I can also pick up on it from you. So let's just take a moment here to set our intention for whatever it is truly that you want from this talk today. So a solar eclipse is paradoxical in that it represents an ending of a cycle while simultaneously the beginning of a next one. And so what I'm saying here is that I think solar eclipses are a powerful moment to double down on the things that you really believe in and that really matter to you, that you want to be in your life. You prioritize it, you value it so much that you want it to be the essence of your life, day in and day out. But it's also about doubling down on letting go of the things that no longer are a fit for you in your life at this moment. So whatever that is, whatever those things are that you want to let go of, that don't serve you being here anymore, this eclipse is also about the releasing and letting go of those things. So we want to double down on the letting go, and then we want to double down on what we're calling in. And to be graphic here, because I can't help it, this particular eclipse is like taking one big cosmic shit on the toilet. And I just want you to imagine taking the best bowel movement of your life, so healthy, so good, just putting it down there. And then when you flush it out, I want you to visualize it going out into the cosmos and turning into stardust and going back into the reformation of other celestial bodies out there. So there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing bad. We're not trying to get rid of it. We're not trying to purify it. We're just trying to say, you know what? This doesn't belong here. And I release it so that it can be taken care of by the universe. Doesn't that just feel so relieving? Like, oh, you know what? That's not all up to me. Like the universe can help me out right now with this big cosmic shit I need to take so I can make room to fill myself with the nutrients that are going to really make me feel good. And that's also what this is about, is doubling down on all of those things that truly feed your soul. All right, so I want to show you some visuals here in the beginning. This is going to be the only technical part of the talk. I want to take a maximum of 5 minutes to explain the timing of this alignment so you can have those dates and so you can also understand how exactly it works. And then we'll move all into exactly what it means. So the first thing I want you to know is that the Saturn-Neptune conjunction happens once every 36 years for all of us. So when I say something's a world transit, that means every human being, all of humanity, is experiencing this particular transit. And this particular transit is currently happening at the very beginning of the sign of Aries and also the very end of Pisces. So Travis, whenever you're ready, if you could help us see that. Essentially a conjunction, and I want you to tune into this image here. If you were to put a telescope up to the sky, what you would see right now is Saturn with its rings there on the left, and then the planet Neptune on the right. And you would see the two of them right next to each other. That's what makes it a conjunction. So that's like a visual of what I'm saying. So every time I say conjunction, that's the visual of what I'm saying. It just means these two planets are in the same place in the sky from our perspective here on Earth. So here's the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. It's happening right now for all of us, and it happens once every 36 years. Okay, so then what I want us to understand is that this collective transit of this planetary alignment lasts for about 3 years at a time every time it happens. But the 3 years aren't all experienced the same. The first 6 months of the alignment, you can go ahead and move into the image of the waveform, please, is like the onset of the transit. So the first 6 months of this, which began in approximately April of 2024, really signifies the setting of the stage. And what I mean by that is it's very similar to reading a novel or to watching a film. Is in the first 6 months of the transit, the scene is getting set. The players are showing up. We're getting to know the characters. We're seeing the set and setting of the alignment. And then after those first 6 months, the transit comes into a greater level of power, of potency. It strengthens. It becomes more saturated and more pervasive. At that point, we're all living within that archetypal energy that correlates to Saturn-Neptune. And that transit lasts very strong for 2 whole years. That would be all of 2025 and all of 2026 when they go in and out of exactitude, meaning they're exactly at the same degree. We've already experienced our first round of that here in 2025, and we solidly have another year to go. And then at the end of the waveform, the transit begins to dissipate. It lessens in its strength and its potency as it wanes or as the wave goes out. We can think of world transits as sets of waves that come into the collective consciousness, just like people who surf. There's a set of waves that come in. Well, the set of the wave that we're currently in together is the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. And in the last 6 months, that set, the waves are going to get smaller and we're going to see them go back out. And that phase of the transit tends to be the time where we're doing more of the integration. We're closing up shop. Most of the big events have taken place. The experiences that we've had, the lessons that we've needed to learn, the reshaping and reconfiguring of all of our individual lives, and then collectively as a human species. And those last 6 months are like the ta-dum. and then it leaves, and then new planetary alignments come in. So this is just a visual of how the wave comes in and the wave goes out. And in the moments of exactitude, like we're in right now, it tends to be the strongest. So I'll just show you a visual for those who like to see it of the current conjunction, what it looks like on a chart. So you can see that. You just see here on the left, the Saturn-Neptune there at 1 degrees Aries. And as I said, this happens every 36 years. So the next conjunction will happen here. You can see a list of dates there on the right. But the next one is going to be taking place in the sign of Gemini. And those dates are going to be happening here. You see the exactitude in 2061. If we go backwards in time, and this is going to be something you're going to want to keep in mind, if you were born during these years, then you were born during a Saturn-Neptune conjunction. The last one happened in 1988 to 1991. So if you were born during those years, you were born with Saturn-Neptune in a conjunction, or whoever you know that was born during those years. And that's something that I'm going to want you to think about. If you were born during that time, then voila, you found your person. But if you weren't, try and see if you know anybody in your personal life that you can anchor what I'm saying into them. If you go back another 36 years, it was in the sign of Libra. That happened in the early 1950s. It was very strong from 1952 to 1954. But really, it came in 1951. Again, it's a 3-year transit. The time before that was in the sign of Leo, 1916 to 1918. And then I'm only going to mention one more before that because that's going to be pertinent to our historical understanding of what is going on today. And that was in the 1800s in 1882. So that gives you a sense of this cycle of time and its rhythm throughout our most current history through the 20th century back into the 19th century, and then the next one in 2061. So that is all you need to know. Those are going to be the only technical parts of the talk. But that just grounds us in that part of astrology that has to do with time. So as I mentioned, I listen for a living, and I want to take this moment to talk to you about what I'm empirically seeing through my observation of what you all are telling me you're experiencing right now under this alignment. You all are telling me that you are feeling very sad. There's a lot of sadness right now, particularly a lot of mourning and grief. People are feeling at times very hopeless. There's been a loss of faith. And this can be about just about anything. There are moments where you're telling me that you've lost faith in yourself, where you've lost faith in humanity. You've lost faith in your marriage. You've lost faith that you can pursue your dreams, that you've lost faith in having a sense of purpose and meaning, that you've lost faith in your family of origin, that you've lost faith in feeling like you can really trust people, or that you can trust doctors, trust science, trust medicine. There's a long list of things that people have lost faith in, but there is a general Saturn-Neptune theme of having moments of losing faith about some particular range of facets of being human. That often can lead to experiences of feeling helpless around knowing how to make something better that feels untenable or impossible. And along with that, there is a general sense of fatigue. And that is manifesting in different ways. That could be chronic fatigue, that could be autoimmune disease, that could be burnout. I'm hearing people are burnout from the news. I'm hearing that people are burnt out from politics. I'm hearing people are burnt out from being parents to young children. I hear people are burnt out from their jobs. I hear that you're burnt out from being neurodivergent, either ADHD, ADD, autistic, bipolar, and that it just feels like it's too much to cope and have a solid, secure baseline of experiencing yourself and reality and managing it. I hear there's burnout from feeling financially stressed. Two of the most major themes I'm hearing right now is stress around health and stress around finances. Or there's a general sense of being run down, shut down, at times feeling frozen or stuck, oftentimes feeling afraid or scared about what's happening in your life or what's happening in the world. Sometimes there's this expression of, everything's actually okay in my personal life right now, but if I open the window and I look outside and I tune into what's going on with the collective, I'm terrified and I feel very afraid. And that looking at what's going on feels like I'm looking out into darkness. And so Saturn-Neptune can be this experience of having a dark vision of the world or seeing things through a very dark lens. And that then can very much create a sense of fear and anxiety. So in general, people are feeling more anxious, more on edge. And that can be like an existential anxiety, or that can just be like heart palpitations in the chest, a tight chest, upset stomach, having meltdowns, feeling more out of control, less composed, less poised, more reactionary, a loss of sense of control. And that there is a sense of feeling more kind of taken over by the contagion of fear. So this is a Saturn-Neptune experience, the word contagion, but we know that that could equally be fear, which is the shadow side of Saturn, but it also could be love. And this is where we're really going to be bringing in aspects of mindful self-compassion into this talk and recognizing that each of us does have a choice in practicing the discernment of where we shift our energy and our focus as one of the main antidotes to a lot of these struggles and issues that a lot of people are having right now. Some of you are saying that you feel desensitized, that you feel like you're disassociated or having a hard time being in your body and really being present. And that some of that is coming from your own natural process of aging or facing mortality in some way, whether that's your own mortality or the mortality of your parents or the mortality of people in your life. There's this general sense of having to face the fact that we are all getting older and more tired, that we have less energy, but also that there's this sense of thinking more about death in general. And that very much is the Saturn. Saturn brings in aging and mortality and death, and Neptune brings in trying to reckon with that or grapple with that spiritually, metaphysically. It also very much is a time of nostalgia where there's this sense of looking back at your own personal past, when you were more youthful or to your childhood, missing times from the past or how things used to be with your family, within your career, within your marriage, when you were younger, when you were in school, but also this sense of nostalgia collectively in humanity, like trying to think back to a time when things didn't feel so extreme, where everywhere you look doesn't feel like there's some kind of crisis going on that needs to be metabolized. So a real sense of longing for the past, whether that's personally or collectively. And in general, Saturn-Neptune represents an end of an era, an end of a dream, an end of a chapter, and varying degrees of acceptance around that, like really accepting whatever this time period has represented for you personally. Each of us are going through an end of an era in our life, where when we look at what's going on symbolically in our own personal lives, there's something there that we thought maybe was permanent, that was going to last forever and stand the test of time. And it turns out that it has not. And there's been a lot of loss in that. And that's, every person has their own individual experience of that. But a lot of times it's manifesting as either loss of certain relationships in your life that you thought were forever relationships with family or friends, or it's a loss of a feeling of the goodness in people and in the world and humanity, and a fear of not really being able to stay fully tuned into that or to embody that again. And so there, in general, and this very much relates to the mourning and the grief process, is there's a lot of emotionally breaking down and needing to cry about all of these different forms of loss that have been going on. The atmosphere in general, and I know I'm going a lot into the challenges right now, and I promise you I will go into all the beauty of it, but there's this sense of dystopia. And Saturn-Neptune, as I said, can be like the dark dream or the dark vision, and it can feel apocalyptic or dystopic. And what I want to offer there is that if you ever are feeling a sense of dystopia or that things are apocalyptic, like there's no return, it's really important to remember that not only will this cycle of time pass, and that this too shall pass as is impermanent, but also that it's not the full whole vision. Saturn-Neptune, in its challenging form, tends to convince us at times that this is it, and it's not going to ever get any different or better than it is. And I just want to say that that's not actually true, but it is very deeply convincing. And I've gone through that even this week in preparing for this talk, because the way I prepare for the talk isn't just through clinical observations and looking at what's going on geopolitically in the world, but it's also through my own heuristic experience. And I went to some very dark places this week, very dystopic. It's a very scary week to be publicly speaking, especially here in the United States, where censorship is so alive. And the vulnerability of speaking to a group of people, especially here, where I don't actually know what your personal beliefs are or stances are politically, and you don't technically know mine. And yet giving a talk is self-revelatory. And I'm here, wanting to speak in a certain fashion where I address the themes and topics that are coming up in the world today, that also relates to all the Saturn-Neptune conjunctions throughout history, while not becoming the thing that I'm pointing out and critiquing, while also taking a stance on my beliefs, and the very fine line of how to actually do that in a way that hopefully is grounded, loving, kind, inspiring, authentic, but also not a revisionist history and not a whitewashing of the challenges, right? Because it's very easy when we look at our shadow to want to rewrite our personal history and to rewrite our collective history. And that is something that is very alive for all of us, no matter where we live in the world, but particularly in America right now. I will speak as someone who lives in the United States. I wake up every day needing to choose to release the terror that I feel in my body and the sheer humiliation of being an American right now, while also remembering my deep sense of devotion and pride to being an American, because that's what American is about as well, right? This great dream. And right now, we are being tested on every single level, from spiritually, mentally, politically. And it's a lot. It's actually quite unbearable and untenable. And these are all Saturn-Neptune themes. Remember, every single word I'm saying relates to the Saturn-Neptune theme. Okay. And every example I'm giving relates to the Saturn-Neptune theme. So this week was a very terrifying week to say, you know what, I want to come here and give a public talk while censorship and where is the line between free speech and hate speech, free speech and harassment. And we're going to get into these subject matters in more nuance and detail, but just to say, like, even as of last night, I almost called in sick and pretended that my kid gave me a virus and made it so I couldn't talk today. That's how bad I didn't want to do this as of, less than 24 hours ago. Thankfully, I came through that experience with a lot of love and support and co-regulation from my partner, Travis, because if I didn't want to give this talk, that meant I was dysregulated. And what I mean when I say I was dysregulated was it means that I was gripped by fear. I was consumed or possessed by feeling fearful and anxious of being my authentic self, of afraid of retribution and condemnation, of being judged or misunderstood. And that almost silenced me. And I don't believe in any of that. And so I knew I was dysregulated. And the reason I was dysregulated was because it's very easy to be dysregulated right now because of the contagion of fear. And because of the reality of what's going on in the world today, there's an incredible amount of violence and hatred that we are being exposed to all the time, that we are killing each other over, quite literally. And so, of course, I was afraid. Of course, you're afraid. Of course, we're all getting dysregulated. But it's also Saturn-Neptune. It's also an eclipse, which is very dysregulating. And I spent all week looking at the news too much. And that's not good for anybody, because I follow the news closely, but I looked very closely. I spent way more time looking at the news than I ever do. And I was fucked up. And to me, that says, oh, for my nervous system, there is a certain dosage of the news that I can handle before I'm not okay. And what I mean by that is I not only didn't like myself at times this week, but I didn't like how I was acting. And when we're dysregulated, we lose our control over our ability to be open and practice restraint at the same time. That's when we're most poised, when we're open and practicing restraint, versus being reactionary and potentially causing harm to ourselves, harm to one another, or allowing harm being caused to us. So when I say, where is the line? And I say, my line is my mental health. Part of what I mean by that in mind, body, and spirit is I choose to prioritize all of my resources, my time, my energy, and my money onto being as regulated as I can be, so I can lessen causing harm to myself and to those around me in the world. Because what I am positing today is that when we are regulated in our nervous systems, we inherently are good people who don't want to murder each other, who don't want to kill each other, who don't want to shoot each other, who don't want to verbally be abusive, who do not want to be psychologically abusive, who do not want to be emotionally abusive. Because when we are in our center and when we feel love for ourselves and we feel kindness towards ourselves, we are so much more resourced and available to naturally extend that to all our fellow human beings that we coexist with, that we actually don't want to abuse each other. And instead, we want to do the very beautiful side of Saturn-Neptune, which is live in a world where each and every single human being is genuinely safe to be authentically who they are, especially when that's different than the way that you are or the way that I am, right? So being regulated in our nervous systems means that we stop abusing one another. What I'm saying here, and this is my take as a psychotherapist and my special interest around nervous systems, is that someone who is regulated does not sexually abuse somebody else. Because when you're regulated, you're not going to perpetuate the harm that's been done to you. And we know that we're much more likely to abuse someone in the way that we've been abused. So one example of that would be sexual abuse. So what I'm saying is someone who's regulated in their nervous system, that feels safe in their body and their emotions and is mentally well, doesn't want to sexually abuse somebody else. Someone who's sexually abusing somebody else is acting out of trauma and is dysregulated. And they're trying to cope with it in a way that's causing further atrocity. We could then scope that out and apply that template to any form of abuse going on in the world, whether that's one-on-one or collectively like genocide. People who are regulated and not acting out of a place of reaction from their trauma and trying to cope with it don't commit genocide. That wouldn't even be an option on the menu. So I think the greatest thing any single human being can do right now is choose to use their resources to the best of their ability to get the help and support they need to be regulated so they don't cause harm to other people. And I'm going to tie this into different Saturn-Neptune themes in just a moment here. I think ultimately what unifies us, which is what Neptune is about, it's about unity and oneness. It's about being together and having a shared common experience, is it's not about us being like one another. It's not about us being the same as one another. It's actually about what unifies us is our shared common ground and core value that I want you to have the highest quality experience of existence that you possibly can as a human being, because you have existence and you have consciousness and you're alive on this planet. And that I also want to have that for me. I want to have the highest quality of experience that I can have of existence. And so I don't actually know what's best for you. I don't actually know who you are or what you should do. You actually don't know what's best for me or how I should be or who I am in some ideological, objective sense of what is good and what is right. But that only I can know what's best for me, and only you can know what's best for you. And so we're not trying to say the best way to be is Christian, or the best way to be is Jewish, or the only way to be is Muslim, or the best or the right way to be is heterosexual, or the best or right way to be is straight, or the only way to be is neurotypical. We're actually saying human beings are each created so uniquely in their individuality that whoever we each are in our God-given birthright that we orient our policies and our politics and our laws and our customs and our norms to respect and genuinely support whatever it is you need to be fully you and whatever I need to be fully me, while removing the judgment that could A, be the same thing, which it's not, or B, that somehow those things are in conflict or competition with one another, which is scarcity consciousness, which is the shadow form of Saturn-Neptune, is a false belief that there's not enough to go around, that there's not enough food, there's not enough water, there's not enough love, there's not enough resources, there's not enough of the divine. And part of what you see in the shadow side of Saturn-Neptune is idolatry. This shadow side of devotion, where we get this sense of fixation and projection that somehow we fall into a trap that we absolutize something that's actually partial. Meaning that we say the truth or the way is money, power, beauty, a person, a president, a religion, an idea, and actually none one thing can ever be the ultimate source of meaning, that's a projection of the divine onto a finite object. So when we understand that during times of Saturn-Neptune, we are more prone individually and collectively to dogmatism, fanaticism, cultism, and idolatry, we say, oh, great. Well, then this talk is going to be about the other side of Saturn-Neptune, which is iconoclasm, meaning that nobody owns God. Nobody owns the goddess. Therefore, nobody owns the right way to be a human being in this world. And so iconoclasm is this impulse to smash false images, false ideologies, or illusions or projections, which are all the shadow side of Neptune. Illusions, false projections, that at the root are coming from a place of fear and insecurity and therefore control. We have to tear down what we've mistaken as the absolute, which is Neptune. But iconoclasm taken too far can destroy symbols and medicine of the sacred. We take it too far, we want to smash everything, then we have dead symbols and we no longer get the mediators of the divine to bring the messages that we all need to hear to come back to center, to come back to source, to come back to our higher selves, and to come back into connection, which is the most beautiful expression of Saturn-Neptune, is living a life of embodied devotional connection to self, other, source, and cosmos. That we choose to practice mindful compassion, to choose again and again to live in our hearts, to love ourselves, and to love one another, particularly in the ways in which we are most human and therefore imperfect. And I'm going to get into the principles of self-compassion in just a moment, because I believe it's one of the best spiritual practices to counteract a lot of the shadow sides of Saturn-Neptune. So the middle path between idolatry and iconoclasm is honoring the images and symbols and rituals that are sacred mediators without mistaking them for God itself, the divine itself. And so therefore we don't mistake any religion for God. We don't mistake any politics as the only way, or any person as a guru, or somehow having all the right answers. Okay. There's a lot more to say. I think I'm in a moment here going to bring in Travis so we can anchor some of this in history and what's going on right now. And then we're going to open that up and riff into all the iterations of how that's coming through.
So anybody who wants to go a little deeper with the history, Chris Brennan on the Astrology podcast with Nick Dagan Best just did a great long episode on the Saturn-Neptune, looking back in history. So some of the research I'm drawing on today comes out of that episode. It's about 8 hours long. So if you don't have 8 hours to listen to it, I will digest and summarize some of it for you today. So, like looking back over thousands of years of history, there's some themes that we can draw out from the Saturn-Neptune conjunctions and all the historical events that are happening alongside of it. And so I'm going to go through this list of about 8 themes here. But all of these kind of most generally can be put under what I formulated here at the top. So the most general theme that we're talking about with these Saturn-Neptune historical themes, I said, is the establishment and dissolution of barriers, borders, and structures on the one hand, and or worldviews, ideologies, and religions. So let's unpack that a little bit. So first we have the establishment and dissolution. So, establishment is a Saturn word. It's foundations of something, whereas dissolution is a Neptunian word. So kind of depending which planet is doing more of the acting in the situation, we can see very opposite iterations coming through. Saturn and Neptune are two of the most opposite archetypal principles. It's part of the reason why we get such complex eras and phenomena coming through with this archetypal combination. You have very dialectically opposed energies, so you get a whole realm of manifestation between those two poles. So we can be laying foundations, we can also be breaking things down. And then what those things are, on the one hand, they can be Saturnian things, barriers, borders, or just structure itself. So in this sense, we might be building a wall to separate two things. We might be building a bridge to connect two things. The structure of an existing country or idea or concept. It might be discovered or it might be broken down. On the other hand, on the Neptunian side of the content, worldviews, ideologies, religions, these are all Neptunian categories. And likewise, we see both the foundation of ideologies and religions, but also the breaking down and dissolving of them. So if we kind of keep that most general formulation in mind, we can talk through some of these more particular themes below. So the first one is very close to that formulation above, and it's literally the setting up and breaking down of walls, boundaries, or borders. So in some cases, this is very physical. Like Jessica said, from that, I'm going to be giving a lot of examples from the last 4 Saturn-Neptune cycles, so you can just kind of have them in your mind. 5 cycles ago was 82, 4 cycles ago, 1917, 1953, and 1989. I'll be kind of naming those as I give examples. So like in 82, for example, they built the Brooklyn Bridge. Very simple example of them connecting these two bodies of land with a bridge. But in 1953, we see the Korean War, which kind of famously sets up this demilitarized zone along the 38th line of latitude. And to this day, that barrier, that dividing line, stays in place with all of the cultural division that it entails. And then in 1989, you get the fall of the Berlin Wall, this great symbol of the end of the Soviet Union and the end of the divide between communist and democratic Berlin and Germany. So you can see it's both, there's no single valence in terms of whether we're seeing challenging or positive phenomena. On the one hand, we see bridges connecting things, lining up with Saturn, Neptune. And the other hand, we see walls dividing things and being connected to war and fighting.
I think that this always speaks to the complexity of the archetype of Saturn, which is Saturn very much is the principle of that which binds us. So it could be something like a bridge that gives us more connection. But at the same time, Saturn can also be negation or the ending of things. And so that could be a barrier of a wall that creates separation between two things. So Saturn can do either connection or disconnection in those two functions. And all of those different expressions of it are occurring under every Saturn-Neptune conjunction.
So a kind of adjacent issue to the setting up and breaking down of walls and borders is this decline and rise of empires that we see over history. And of course, a lot of times, an empire taking over territory would involve breaking down walls. But we can see how those two things kind of go hand in hand. Likewise, we see this theme of the death of a leader or the death of a king. Um, and this one's kind of interesting because I think there's some overlap between the Saturn-Neptune archetype here, but also the eclipse archetype. Um, Historically, eclipses, when the sun is covered over by the moon, the sun from time immemorial was the symbol of the divine and of the king, especially in Egyptian solar religion. We see the pharaoh being literally identified with God in this incarnate form. And so the covering up of the sun in the sky was seen as a symbol, an ominous symbol that the king might die. So we see that with eclipses, but also with the Saturn-Neptune, with the Neptune being the symbol of the divine, connected to the king as a kind of bridge to the divine, and Saturn taking that form of negation that Jessica was just mentioning. So with both of those archetypes, we see this kind of death of the king, which would be connected to this decline and rise of empires. That 1917 lines up with the end of World War I, where the losers in World War I, all of their territories being divided up, and we see, the winners on the rise, the losers on the decline. But we do see a lot of these big geopolitical moments, like the end of World War I, the kind of beginning of these most intense years of the Cold War, at the beginning of the Soviet Union, and then, like I said, the dissolution of the Soviet Union in the late 80s. The third theme here is popular uprisings, revolts, and rebellions. Um, Especially if you've worked with Rick Tarnas's work, we would, more commonly think of Uranus Pluto with themes like this. I think one way we can kind of understand it is um, there's a kind of decline and rise of empire going on, a sort of breakdown of an old structure, breakdown of an old worldview. You think about an empire falling, something like the Roman Empire, or later in Europe, the Holy Roman Empire, that had endured for so long that people just they didn't think that the Roman Empire could ever end. And when news of Rome being sacked by the Visigoths, made its way across the kingdom, some people just simply couldn't believe it. It seemed like a thing that was impossible to them. And so this decline of an empire from the point of view of those who are causing the popular uprising or revolt, um, from their point of view, it's a popular uprising, but from the people who were running the empire formerly, it's going to be the decline of an empire. So that's kind of how we can understand these popular uprisings showing up so often with the Saturn-Neptune. There was a Saturn-Neptune in around 1773, 74, right around the beginning of the American Revolution. So that's one we're all familiar with. Fourthly, we see religious or ideological, both Neptunian symbols. And like I was saying, we see both foundations or laws, rules being set up, but also periods of repression when a certain religion or ideology is being tamped down. And that, of course, would be, yeah, Saturn in its form of foundation or negation, acting on Neptune as religion or ideology. We also saw themes around secrets, paranoia, and the paranormal. So these are kind of these negative sides of Neptune, kind of hiddenness, secrets. Um, Paranoia can be a very negative Neptunian feeling. And of course, the paranormal, what kind of lies beyond the veil and intrudes into this world.
We're going to see a lot here around conspiracy theories. We see a lot here around this understanding of and confusion around the difference between science and religion, or science and astrology. You get things where you start to say, okay, is that really science or is that pseudoscience? And there's a lot of questioning going on with that right now. But you also see it in this blurring of church and state. where they used to be separated and now maybe they're more together, or they're looking to be more separated. And so Saturn can come in as the separation between church and state, or Neptune can come in as the blurring or dissolving of that and it trying to become one again. It also, you get it in things where this very much relates to science and astrology, where, and you've seen this recently in the New York Times, or with other social scientists coming out and saying astrology isn't scientifically proven, therefore it's not real. And that's a misstep, because you're trying to say and apply the scientific method to something that isn't scientific, but actually is symbolic. Astrology is symbolic and metaphorical. It's a form of divination. It's also a spirituality. It's a tool for divination. It also very much is about the mythopoetic. And so it carries a lot of the Neptunian themes. And sometimes you hear this misstep where either people try to prove that astrology is real by applying scientific method to it, like statistical analysis and prediction, or saying it's a pseudoscience because it's not actually provable. And so again, you see a blurring of saying that something that is scientific is, and something that is maybe a form of divination, and the lines getting blurred between that. And a lot of confusion, which is a common experience with Saturn Neptune, about what's real and what's not real, and not knowing where the line is between those two things.
Yeah, just to give an example of that paranoia and not knowing what's real, with these time periods that I was just mentioning, around the rise of communism, there of course were these times of the Red Scare in the US, first in 1917, and then again in the 50s, McCarthyism, when Joseph McCarthy was famously calling people out on ruining people's lives, calling them communists. And there was just this big, yeah, paranoia that just really took over mainstream culture in the US. The next category here is pharmakon and physics. Jess has already been into this a little bit. Pharmakon is a Greek word. Uh, it's very rich in the Greek. It means both. It's kind of like the word drug in English, that it can have both the sense of medicine, but also the sense of poison. It can also mean a kind of charm or magic spell. And so in this category, I'm putting pandemics in history, advances in vaccines, chemical and biological weapons, prohibition when alcohol was made illegal in the US for a period there, and also drug control. If some of us who are of my generation remember in the 80s and early 90s, they were doing DARE at our schools, and there was this whole period where they were really trying to push this war on drugs. Saturnian negation against the Neptunian chemicals.
So for me here, pharmakon is a deeply psychological and spiritual concept that I think is really at the heart of the work that I do, and definitely at the heart of Saturn Neptune and this talk, which is in Greek medicine, pharmakon was referred to as the potions and the herbs and the compounds that could either heal or kill depending on their preparation and their application. And the thing that this has the closest to in modern science and medicine would be toxicology, which has also become one of my special interests. Lately, I've taken a great interest in toxicology and public health. And Toxicology 101 pretty much says that it really, that what makes something a poison or a toxin is simply the dosage of it. That there actually is no such thing as something in of itself being poisonous or toxic, but it's both the dose of that thing and the way in which it is administered that makes it poisonous or toxic. And this is actually a really deep truth that we see show up in so many different things, including vaccines, including fluoride in the water, different public health initiatives in the United States, like folate on wheat. And so this is a very deep theme, because that is the literal medicine version of it, but we can apply the same theme spiritually and psychologically. And there's this great quote in toxicology that perfectly summarizes it. It comes from the father of toxicology, Paracelsus, which says, "All things are poison and nothing is without poison. The dose makes the poison." So in this idea, any substance can be a medicine or a toxin depending on the quality, depending on the quantity, the preparation, and the context. And it's exactly the paradox of pharmacon that we see in more scientific terms. So the reason why this is so important is because sometimes we'll hear these phrases, especially in things like the wellness industry, of that has chemicals in it. But in all technicality, everything is a chemical. There's nothing that's not a chemical. Everything in existence is technically, from a scientific standpoint, a chemical. So when we say that has chemicals in it, that actually, from a scientific perspective and a toxicology perspective, doesn't make sense. A classic example from Toxicology 101 that we would see in this is the idea that even something like salt or oxygen could be poisonous in too much for a human being. So a teaspoon of salt can provide electrolytes and hydrate your body and can be very healthy for you, but a cup of salt could actually make you very sick and poison you. So it's the dosage of the amount of salt and how it's administered to the human being that decides whether or not it is medicinal, healing, or it's poisonous or a toxin. The same would be true for oxygen. We know that we need a certain amount of oxygen to breathe, but if you have too much oxygen, you could die. So this is a really deep principle that I think is a lifelong meditation to try and take in, because essentially what we're saying here is that everything in life comes down to dosage, context, and the relational use that determines whether or not it's healing or it's harmful. In pharmacon, what it reminds us is that oftentimes what has wounded us in life often becomes psychologically and spiritually intertwined with that which ends up healing us. And that it's our relationship to the wound or the trauma and the level of care that we bring to it that determines whether or not it's something that destroys us or something that ends up healing us and giving us greater levels of creativity and connection. And so it really rests on how we engage it. I'm going to give you another example of this. Because Saturn is time and place and the boundaries and barriers and borders of where things belong and don't belong, I'm going to give you the example of hurricanes. Travis and I live in Siesta Key, Florida, and we went through 3 major hurricanes 1 year ago during the eclipse season from last year. The first hurricane flooded our home only about half a foot, but we had to rebuild everything and take the home down to its studs. We live in a 1-story beach cottage, and we lost most of our possessions. We started to rebuild the home, and a month later, one of the biggest hurricanes on record came directly to where we lived, and the ocean rose up and came in and covered the entire island 6 feet underground. So everybody where I live lost their home if it was on the first floor and all of their belongings. Now, mind you, I was also 5 months pregnant when this happened, which is probably one of the hardest times you could lose your home when you need to nest and prepare to welcome this new soul into your life. But this is a really good example of toxicology and pharmacon in the physical world, which is salt water is needed in the ocean for the survival of all of the fish. Salt water on land kills everything. So salt water in the ocean is medicinal. But when that salt water comes onto land, it's toxic. It's not the salt water that is medicinal or toxic, it's the context of it, it's the place of it. So when the salt water came onto the land, it killed all of the plants. To replace the plants in our yard alone, which is not very big, would have been a minimum of $20,000. To replace the plants on the island that I lived would be millions and millions and millions of dollars. Once salt water enters your home, not only do you have to rebuild every single thing inside of the home and replace all of your treasures and belongings, you have to redo everything because the salt water later down the road gets into the electrical system and can make your house burn down. So now, because of the context, the salt water has created a toxic environment that now has to be cleaned up in order to be habitable again. This is a clear example of pharmacon and toxicology with natural disasters, which under Saturn-Neptune, we see an increase of around anything that has to do with water. So under Saturn-Neptune, you see bigger, stronger hurricanes. You see more flooding and flash flooding from rivers. You see more downfall and precipitation all at once. What used to be given in 1 year is given in a day. Or you see the opposite of it, where we're experiencing extreme, unprecedented droughts, where there is no water, where there needs to be water, and the largest forest fires in recorded history. So these are all Saturn-Neptune events that are dealing with the component of Neptune that has to do with water. And the component of Saturn, which has so much to do with toxicology and pharmacon, which is about dosage and administration, the time and the place. A lot of rain can be good when it's spread out, but a lot of rain at once can flood your home, like happened to us. This principle analogously can be applied to every single thing in every single one of our lives, including all of the relationships we're in, including the medicine we take or don't take. So this directly relates to vaccines, because the idea there in modern medicine is that we figured out that a certain exposure to something that has caused people to get sick or die in the right dosage can actually do the opposite of that, which is prevent death and sickness. So a vaccination is essentially given just enough of the poison so that you can be healthy. Vaccines are a direct outcome of pharmacon and toxicology in the modern sense. The same with fluoride in the water. Fluoride at a high dose is dangerous for you, but at a very small dose, which has been tested over and over again, prevents cavities, especially in the lower socioeconomic places in the world where people can't afford to go get their teeth cleaned at the dentist, right? So just a little bit of fluoride in all of our water actually is a huge public health initiative. And Saturn-Neptune has a lot to do with the outcome of successful public health initiatives that protect our collective Neptune health. The same goes with folate in the wheat. We realize that if you put a little bit of folate on the wheat, you greatly reduce spina bifida, and you greatly reduce women losing their babies and babies coming into the world without their spines fully formed or disfigured in some way. Just a little bit of folate goes a long way. So again, these are physical medicinal versions in science and medicine that we could then metaphorically apply to everything in our lives.
You had mentioned flooding there, Jess. I thought I'd just mention this kind of funny, bizarre example. In 1917, there was this event called the Great Molasses Flood of Boston. And evidently, like thousands of gallons of molasses were flowing through the street of Boston when something went awry with all the barrels in the truck. And I just thought it was this cool image of, on the one hand, this great flood flowing, but it's got this really slow Saturnian quality of molasses. Um, I just thought that was kind of a neat, bizarre Saturn-Neptune image, a slow flooding.
I also now want to go into some of this sense of Saturn Neptune that also very much relates to Virgo Pisces around purity and addiction. So under Saturn Neptune, you get very strong themes of addiction. And if you or someone in your life is addicted, then usually there's an increase in those addictions during Saturn Neptune, where someone, let's say if someone is addicted to alcohol or addicted to numbing out or checking out in some way, then there is usually an increase in a saturation level with those addictions. But also the opposite can be true. Whereas under Saturn Neptune, you can see people get sober because Saturn comes in and says, I'm no longer going to go into the shadow side of Neptune, which is the escapism and the numbing out and the disassociation. But if we get even deeper into it and we apply pharmacon and toxicology, what we realize is it actually isn't really any very much to do with the alcohol or the drugs or whatever. It actually has to do with our relationship to it. So some people constitutionally can drink and they're fine. And other people constitutionally cannot drink. They're not okay. Some people can do marijuana and they're okay. Whereas other people, it makes them psychotic. Some people have no problem doing psychedelics and it's healing for them and liberating for them. Whereas other people, it is deeply destabilizing. So it has nothing itself to do with the substance, but it has to do with that person's unique constitution and temperament and sensory profile. So instead of they're saying, oh, you should or shouldn't drink, or you should or shouldn't do drugs, it actually is a uniquely tailored experience that's based on what your particular medicine path is. But this also relates to purity. And you get this a lot with Saturn Neptune, where people want to be really pure. And they can take that to an extreme where they end up being addicted to being pure. And you see this in the holistic wellness industry, where like people have such clean diets that they get at times very paranoid about any toxins coming into their environment or anything synthetic coming into their environment, that they become hyperly vigilant and neurotic to the point where it starts to cause problems and issues for them to be able to be in healthy, functioning relationships in their lives. So we can be as equally addicted to purity as we can be to substances, or we can be equally addicted to being a victim in our lives and blaming other people for all of our problems and actually being very hostile while claiming everybody else is being aggressive with us, as we can being addicted to alcohol or watching TV. Another fun fact, for people who are neurodivergent and are autistic, like myself and my daughter, screen time is actually highly regulating for our nervous systems. Being able to what's called stim by watching different shows that we're in control of, the content that we're consuming, actually regulates our nervous system. That's why for a lot of people who are neurodivergent and autistic, we don't limit their screen time as children in the way that maybe you would with a neurotypical or holistic child, because actually a lot of screen time can be very dysregulating for that sensory profile. So we don't all have the same needs. We don't all have the same sensory profiles as one another. I have a particularly sensitivity to light. I have one of the accommodations I need in my life is to be able to turn lights down. We don't actually turn on any overhead lights except when I'm teaching in our home, unless it's an emergency. I also wear special sunglasses when I go out into the world when I need the accommodation of being able to block out the light because I can't tell somebody else to turn the lights off. Whereas my daughter, who's also autistic, that's not part of her autism. She doesn't have a light sensitivity. She has a sound sensitivity. So whenever she hears a sound she doesn't like, she has to cover her ears or sometimes put on headphones or remove herself because her sensory profile is a heightened sensitivity to sound. And so that's dysregulating for her. Well, now we can apply that same sense of what's regulating or dysregulating for any one of us and say that that's true all the time for all of us. So for some people, silent meditation is highly regulating. And for other people, silent meditation is dysregulating and re-traumatizing. So we can't actually say meditation is good for you because it depends on whether or not meditation is something that regulates or dysregulates you. If it sends you back into trauma, that's not something we want you doing. The same could be true for anything that we would classically consider forms of things that are healthy for you, like yoga. Well, yoga is good for you. Well, if it's regulating, it is. But for some people who are hypermobile, which are a lot of neurodivergent people, it actually might not be good for you because it pulls your neck muscles or it dislodges your hip. And so telling you to stretch actually isn't something that's going to be good for you. So this ties back into the sense of there is no objective truth of one path of what is good and what is bad, what is a medicine and what is a poison. It's all deeply subjective. So what regulates you is going to be unique to you. And the only way that you can find that out is if you are privileged enough to be in a place where you can be present enough in your life and have the resources to go and discover and learn what is actually healthy for you. And this very much relates to, in psychotherapy, medication support. For some people, medication support, taking things like antidepressants, SSRIs, is a really good option because it's the most kind thing for that person's mental health. It raises their baseline. It regulates them to get to have the highest quality of experience of being human. It turns out, ironically, that the people who often need to be taking medication to have the best quality experience of themselves usually are the ones that are most prone to not taking it because there's a fear around taking medication. I used to be one of those people. I used to not take ibuprofen. I used to not take anything. There was this sense of fear and anxiety around taking medication, but it turns out that medication is something that is really good for my anxiety. I take a low dose of Neurontin or gabapentin twice a day, and that takes the edge off my nervous system so that I can be regulated, so that I can be present, because being present and regulated means I'm going to be the most likely to learn and grow and heal from life, including my own mistakes that I make. Whereas for somebody else, medication support isn't going to be a good option for them, and we will want to encourage them to find other tools for regulation. So these are all just various ways and inroads for us to talk about these different Saturn-Neptune themes in a kind of what we're calling a pragmatic mystic. And this is very much the beautiful side of Saturn-Neptune and of Virgo Pisces is the pragmatic mystic. Somebody who says, what I am is human, which means I'm imperfect and I need help and support to live this life. And when I tune into what I need and ask myself, what is it that I need to feel good, I can actually have the highest quality of life. That's a pragmatic mystic. And that is a really grounded, I think, healthy and mature version of the Saturn-Neptune. Take it away, Trav.
Yeah, I just wanted to draw out a little bit more what you're saying here about, I guess, what we've both been saying about some of this overlap between Saturn, Neptune, and Virgo Pisces. It's kind of interesting. The Virgo Pisces sign axis has these Saturn-Neptune qualities to it. I mean, of course, Neptune as a ruler of Pisces has that dreamlike Piscean character. But Virgo too, as an Earth sign and with this real practical, pragmatic angle, has some of these qualities of Saturn. So it's interesting, especially under this eclipse in Saturn-Neptune, to see some of these similarities um, between Virgo Pisces, where the eclipse is happening, and the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. When we were talking about this, I was recalling how some I've heard before the Virgo Pisces axis talked about in specific terms as the Virgin being the Virgin Mary and Pisces being this Jesus fish symbol. I always thought that was kind of a cool version of those symbols coming through. And then I can't remember why it came up, Jess, but we were calling this last eclipse portal the what was it, the unicorn something unicorn birthday.
Unicorn mermaid birthday, I think.
So I can't remember why it came up, but we were talking about unicorns, and I kind of remembered that the myth of the unicorn laying its head down in a virgin's lap, and I was like, what is that about again? And looked it up, and then we realized that even that story was a parable of Mother Mary the Virgin and Christ being uh, the unicorn figure. Okay, so I wanted to mention a few examples of this pharmacon um, through history. So the first comes from that 1882 Saturn-Neptune conjunction, and this was when Louis Pasteur, who was born with a tight Saturn-Neptune trine, when he first synthesizes the anthrax vaccine. This is one of the first vaccines to ever come online, and it confirms germ theory, which was still contested at the time, that germs, these little hidden pathogens, hidden Neptune, pathogen, negative organism Saturn. So these are what are causing diseases like anthrax. Uh, Pasteur figures this out and develops the first vaccine under that Saturn-Neptune. Under that same Saturn-Neptune, a distant relative of Jessica, she didn't know I was going to pull this out. Uh, President Garfield uh, dies under this conjunction. He was shot, um, but he's shot in July of '81. Doesn't die until September, and the guy who shot him famously says in court, I may have shot him, but it was the germs who killed him. So all these doctors were coming to examine President Garfield because they wanted him to get better, and they're all sticking their dirty fingers in his wound without any sanitary procedure, without any gloves. So we're talking, upwards of like probably 50, 100 doctors, all coming wanting to be the one who's going to save the day. And of course, they don't know about germ theory yet because it's only, just been confirmed. And so, yeah, it's everyone's pretty certain that the reason he died was from contamination of the wound, and that, had it just been the gunshot, he might have survived it.
Whoa, okay. That is a cool fact. Are you going to say something else there before I take my stance?
Yeah. So yeah, let me give the series. So that was in 1882. We get this big moment in the history of vaccines and germ theory. Under the very next conjunction in 1917 is the Spanish flu, this deadly influenza pandemic. So again, we get this big incident, hidden pathogens, chemical sickness. Under the very next Saturn-Neptune conjunction, 1953, the polio vaccine is developed. And then under the very next conjunction after that, in '88, the Global Polio Eradication Initiative is launched. And in the next couple decades, polio is eliminated from the US. So we see very regularly under those last four Saturn-Neptune conjunctions, big turning points in this history around sickness, pandemic, and the vaccines to address it.
So obviously that relates to what's going on right now, at least here in the United States with the CDC and RFK Jr. And the absolute horrific atrocity of this propaganda and misinformation and disinformation, which is the shadow side of Saturn-Neptune, that vaccines cause autism. And as someone who used to wonder this myself, and read all of the literature I possibly could before having my children on deciding whether or not I was going to vaccinate them, it is one of the things that has been most gut-wrenching for me and my family, because as I said earlier, I'm autistic and my daughter is autistic. And for someone to spread propaganda and fear that vaccines could cause autism, which we know and have known for a long time, they do not only is harmful to public health, but also is deeply harmful to anybody in the autistic community. We have known for a long time that autism is considered a neurotype. It just means that the brain functions differently in processing information than in what's called a neurotypical or holistic brain. Autism is under the umbrella of neurodivergence, which earlier I said includes things like ADHD, ADD, bipolar, dyslexia. And essentially, it's understood as a necessary and natural form of human evolution, that the way that our brains work creates a diversity of consciousness, and that people who are autistic have a difference in three things: language, social interaction, and interests / routines. And the way in which those differences show up from someone who is holistic or neurotypical can be very wide-ranging and have a lot of variation in theme, but the definition of what makes someone autistic is a difference in those things. Some fun facts about autism. Part of the reason why usually we're considered people who are HSPs, highly sensitive people, it's understood now that most people who probably identify in that way has a very strong likelihood of being neurodivergent, because there is in the brain of someone who is neurodivergent, the neurons and synapses in your brain didn't go through the same pruning process that neurotypical people's brains go through early in childhood. For neurotypical people, the brain does a thing called its pruning process, where it essentially makes all of these millions and millions of calculations of things that you don't need, because it's not going to really be that useful, it's deemed. And so it prunes synapses that would otherwise make connections with one another around things like pattern recognition and the intake of information. The autistic brain does not go through that pruning process. So that's why in autistic people, you see things like heavy pattern recognition and sensitivity to sensory processing, because we are literally more sensitive to our stimuli in our environment, and our brain doesn't filter out information in the same way that an holistic brain does. So it's a neurotype. It's not a disease. It's not something to be fixed. And this is a deep stance for me, because as an advocate for myself and my daughter around being autistic, it's so important that it's not connected with this propaganda of vaccines, because that both damages public health, because vaccines are probably the greatest invention in modern science. Yes, I'm pro-vaccine. And of course, there's exceptions to that, but yes. And it also hurts the neurodivergent community, who is already targeted because we are different. And we already go through bullying and being misunderstood. And that has a direct impact on our mental health. People who are neurodivergent struggle more with mental health issues than neurotypical people, particularly around getting accommodations and support that's needed. This actually ties back into the beginning of the talk, where I said that I believe the most beautiful world that we live in is the one where everyone gets to be authentically themselves, including their neurotype. It also just so happens that the people who are neurodivergent are more likely to be queer and trans, that those things have a direct correlate to one another. A lot of people who are queer are also neurodivergent because there aren't the same kind of more traditionally narrow views of what it means to be human or love, to want to love one another as we see being shaped out of a more neurotypical society, which is what our society is currently based and formed out of. So there's one of my stances that I'm taking. This also very much relates to something I'm hearing from all of you around the Saturn-Neptune, which is there is a general sense of not liking what you see when you look in the mirror. That when you look in the mirror, there's a lot of criticism going on, whether that's about how you literally look or around your aging and loss of youth, or your imperfections, but also in a more metaphorical sense, looking into the mirror, looking at your own reflection, being self-reflective, that there are ways in which you don't like how you're acting or how you're behaving or how you're treating the people in your life. And so Saturn-Neptune can be this feeling of seeing a dark image or being very critical of the image that you see. And this is really important. And I'm going to use this specific example around neurodivergence, but this again can analogously be applied to anything in life, which is this. Neurodivergence is 90% inherited. And therefore, if you find out that your child is autistic or bipolar, ADD or ADHD, there's a very likely chance that you or your partner is also neurodivergent because it's genetic. And so I think actually, especially in the field of mental health, that if someone gets a diagnosis, it should be recommended immediately that the parents should also get evaluated, because most likely they're neurodivergent as well. But one of the main setbacks and roadblocks that I see for children getting the support they need, and this applies to neurotypical and neurodivergent children, is the parents not accepting and liking those same qualities or characteristics in their own self that they don't then like or approve or accept of in their child. And so the child not only doesn't get the support and accommodations that they need, but the parent perpetuates through self-hatred of those same self-similar qualities in them that they are then seeing in the child. And so then the child feels shamed for the things that are true that they inherited from the parent, that the parent doesn't like in their own self. And this is a big part of Saturn-Neptune, where we see the difference between conditional love and unconditional love. Conditional love is the shadow side of Saturn-Neptune. You have to be a certain way in order to get my love and approval. You have to be a certain way in order to be given human rights. You have to be a certain way in order to be able to go to a good school or to get certain services. So the withholding of things towards someone because they're not the way you think they should be. Whereas unconditional love, which is the positive side of Saturn-Neptune, says, I deeply accept and am kind and loving and compassionate to the ways in which I need help and support and or are different and or need accommodations. Therefore, I can have compassion and understanding that every human being needs that. And so I unconditionally love everybody, saying everyone deserves to have what it is they need to be having a high quality of life. So this idea, ideologically, in the culture wars that are going on right now in the world, and I'll speak here specifically to the United States, is this. There is no such thing versus left and right. There is only up and down. And once the up has convinced the down that the problem is with the other people in the down, we have a serious problem, because now we are othering each other. And the second we say, my tribe is better than your tribe, we commit atrocities towards one another. Once we dehumanize somebody else on this planet is the moment we can start harming them, killing them, withholding food and resources that they need to live, which allows for things like genocide. There is no left versus right. There is only the ones at the top who have all the money and all the resources and want us to think that the problems we have in our life are because of one another when they're not at all. The second we believe this false narrative, which is a common thing under Saturn-Neptune, is the belief in false narratives, we start to other and we start to be afraid. And remember when I said earlier that fear is a contagion? It is the most contagious thing that exists on the planet. The second that we are afraid of ourselves and the second we are afraid of one another and stop trusting each other, then that's the moment we can no longer take care of ourselves and take care of one another. So when it comes to having children, if you are not prepared to unconditionally love the soul that comes into your life, then you're not ready to be a parent. And that's a line for me. Where is the line? That's a line. It's not up to you whether your child is autistic or not. It's not up to you whether or not they're trans. It's not up to you whether or not they're queer. It's not up to you whether or not whatever they are. That's not up to you. You don't get to decide that for anybody else. And if your taking care of someone is dependent or contingent on that, then you, I think, ethically don't have the right to take care of that person. Because you can't actually care for them. And therefore you're causing them harm. And that's my line. And it's a very hard thing to do. It's the hardest thing to do is to unconditionally love your child. Because all the ways that keep me from unconditionally loving my child are me problems that I need to be resourced enough to deal with, to get regulated enough within my own self, so then I am not shaming, blaming, projecting, scapegoating whoever this soul is that I am not in control of being. The greatest mystery box of life, the children we have or the children we don't have, right? There's no right version to that. But for me, the line comes down to that. And then we can extrapolate that to any other human relations that we have. This one is very emotional for me. And this very much relates back into the antidote to conditional love for ourselves and one another, which is mindful self-compassion. This comes out of the work of Kristin Neff, who's freaking brilliant. Very down to earth, very embodied, very practical, very something easily done at any moment, no matter who you are or where you are. And there's three components of self-compassion. The first is self-kindness versus self-judgment. This is all Saturn-Neptune. Self-kindness is essentially the ability to be warm and understanding with ourselves when we suffer, fail, or feel inadequate, rather than harshly critical. We offer kindness to ourselves not to feel better, but because we are suffering. And that's the difference there. We don't offer kindness to ourselves to alleviate the suffering. That's just a natural byproduct of offering ourselves kindness. We literally offer ourselves kindness because we are suffering. Some say treating yourself as you would a friend, with gentleness instead of attack. Some people call this curious compassion. I don't know, but I'd love to understand. The second component is common humanity versus isolation. So common humanity is the beautiful side of Saturn-Neptune in its mature, clear, healthy version, whereas isolation is the distorted shadow side. So common humanity essentially says, I recognize that suffering and imperfection are part of the shared human experience. So instead of feeling alone in our struggles, why me? We remember everyone struggles and I'm not alone in this. That's the second component of self-compassion. The third one, the last one, is mindfulness versus over-identification. This one's really hard to do. Mindfulness says, I'm going to hold painful thoughts and feelings in balanced awareness rather than either ignoring them, which would be Saturn negating them, or Neptune saying I'm going to escape from them or numb out for them or avoid them, or I'm going to exaggerate them. So we can either ignore our painful thoughts and feelings, we can exaggerate them, or we can hold them. And I think this is a perfect quote to summarize that, which is, this is from Kristen Neff, when you shift from identifying with your pain to being the compassion that holds the pain, everything changes. So as a psychotherapist, I see three main pitfalls when working with people around healing and their suffering. Saturn-Neptune is about our suffering and our healing. The first one is the piece around self-kindness versus self-judgment. Oftentimes, we withhold being kind to ourselves for a myriad of reasons. Usually, there's a false belief that if we offer ourselves kindness, we're letting ourselves off the hook. We won't continue to grow and learn, or in some way, we don't deserve it because we're so awful. That actually perpetuates not only our own self-harm and suffering, but it makes us much more prone to cause harm to other people. Because until we learn to forgive ourselves for our imperfections, shortcomings, and failings, we actually don't know how to genuinely forgive others in our lives. That's a huge source of suffering for people that I think is unnecessary suffering. Also, we're very identified with our inner critic, the shadow side of Saturn as the superego. Biologically, every human being has an inner critic, so we actually don't need to take it so personally. It's part of our survival. Our brains are hardwired to be critical as a way to survive. But with mindful self-compassion, we recognize that the inner critic is just one facet of self. It's not the whole self, and it's not really the story that we want to be listening to and to not take so personally. That leads us into the second part around our shared humanity. A place that I see people get tripped up in my practice is thinking that their suffering is somehow unique to them when it's not. This thing of like, why me? Why is it so bad for me? Nobody else is like this. Nobody's like me. Nobody's going through what I'm going through. The second we're saying that, we've lost connection with our shared humanity, which is that we all suffer and we all deal with problems and we all have pain. They might not be identical, but it's also true that whatever problem, pain, or suffering you have because you're part of humanity. And it means that somebody else also is suffering and has pain from that same thing. So our pain and our suffering come from our shared humanity, but also so do our virtues and gifts. So whatever you're gifted at, whatever virtues you have, also come from you being human and from your shared humanity. So it cuts both ways. And then thirdly, the mindfulness piece. And this is something that we see with the Saturn-Neptune that can be really tricky, which is victim consciousness, which actually very much relates to scarcity consciousness. And that is when we become identified with the suffering versus being the compassionate container, which is a healthy version of Saturn-Neptune, to hold the suffering. And this directly creates into the image of the chalice. The chalice is the sacred vessel that we can fill up with spirit, imagination, healing, love, unconditional love, Neptune. When our chalice is full of spirit, we feel connected, safe, a sense of meaning, purpose, usually flow, magic, connection. When our chalice is empty or low, when we feel under resourced, dysregulated, disconnected, we often are much more likely to be identified in the victim or scarcity consciousness that then prohibits us from being able to release the suffering by being with it, which is essentially what we know the grief process is, which is another form of Saturn-Neptune. And the chalice is we think of our grief and our mourning and our tears as the sacred medicine that allows us to process, metabolize, release, and let go of our unnecessary suffering and bring us back into the present moment, which is the only place that we can experience regulation, love, connection, meaning, and joy is in the present moment. So essentially, the spiritual path of Saturn-Neptune is a constant process through our imperfections and being human, falling out of the present moment into anxiety or depression, rumination, perseveration, and then choosing to get regulated and come back into the present moment so that we can refeel connection, love, joy, safety, meaning, purpose, all the awesome stuff of being a human being. That is what makes it worth incarnating. Saturn is incarnation, Neptune is the spirit. So it's the incarnation of spirit into matter through the soul into the human form. But the soul realizes that it's human and it's imperfect and it suffers, but that also we are deeply dependent on one another for walking ourselves home. Mindful self-compassion. All right, Travis?
Yeah, the next category that I was going to mention is women's rights and leadership. Again, this is one that doesn't, at first glance, you wouldn't necessarily think it was a Saturn-Neptune theme, but just empirically, it just kept coming up in the history, back thousands of years. Japanese empresses and Chinese, just when there weren't that many women in power way back when, it's just a surprising number line up with these Saturn-Neptune conjunctions. And so, just giving it some thought, it seems to me like instead of Saturn or Neptune having some kind of innate connection to the feminine, I wonder if it's more of a story of, this breakdown of structures that we've been talking about. Just very generally, one of the oldest and, once seemingly most firm categories or structures were gender categories, and were the roles that men and women were expected to play. And so when you see the strong Saturn Neptune energy coming in, breaking down old barriers, breaking down structures, dissolving what seemed so firm, yeah, maybe just a classic instance of that is these gender roles that we once thought were so firm, changing. And women suddenly coming into these positions of leadership, positions of power, or more generally, gaining rights and privileges within this patriarchal society that they didn't once have. Um, so to give some examples of that, if we even go back a cycle before 1882 to 1848, this is the Seneca Falls Convention, the very first women's rights convention in the US, which kicks off the organized women's suffrage movement. In 1882, one cycle later, you get the Married Women's Property Act in the UK. Married women at least, are able to own property. One cycle after that, around that 1917 period, women get the right to vote in Canada, then in the UK, then in Germany, and then in the US, all in the span of 3 years there, 1917 to 20, under the Saturn-Neptune. In 53, the UN develops and formally adopts the Convention on the Political Rights of Women, which grants women the right to vote, hold office, and exercise public functions on an equal basis with men. That same year, Simone de Beauvoir publishes The Second Sex, one of the classic texts of feminism, and Eleanor Roosevelt comes out for the Equal Rights Amendment. Lastly, in 89, we get these hearings when Clarence Thomas is being evaluated for his nomination to the Supreme Court. These hearings around accusations of sexual harassment against Anita Hill. And even though that situation didn't go very well, Clarence Thomas is obviously on the Supreme Court. It did set off this surge of activism and questioning of these typical male-dominated leadership. So the following year, 1990, actually became known as the Year of the Woman, because there was a record number of women that were elected to Congress, and we just saw a big sea change in female political leadership. So again, very clear, every Saturn-Neptune conjunction, we see a big shift in some of those leadership and rights of women.
Thank you for bringing in that piece, especially around the healing of patriarchy. Neptune wants to bring healing and wholeness to whatever it touches. And Saturn is the tradition, the customs, the norms, the law, the legal system, the government. And obviously, we're living in the time of patriarchy. And essentially, I like to define that every time because it kind of, now we, mostly have all heard this word at this point, which essentially means that it's a dominated society where the men make up the laws, the rules, the customs, and the norms. And any deviation from that, you are punished in some way, legally, culturally, socially, relationally, psychologically, what have you. And it usually privileges men and certain groups over others, including women and minorities. This is a really important thing to take in because this is something that's coming from doing a lot of work with couples. So in my psychotherapy practice, I work with individuals and couples. And, by the way, I said I listen 90 to 95% of the time. That's why I give these talks, so I can keep my fucking sanity and get to say something once in a while after digesting everything you guys are telling me. So I have a podcast and do these talks. So thank you for co-regulating my mental health with me and allowing me to speak right now. Which is often something that goes unaddressed in most people's relationships, whether or not they're heterosexual couples, it doesn't actually matter, is the way that patriarchy plays a signifying role within the relationship. And so a lot of the deepening into connection and intimacy when we fall in love with somebody, particularly in the early years, when we do it consciously and intentionally, there's inevitably a component of that intimacy and connection where there's needing to be some kind of conscious loving healing around the way in which patriarchy is showing up in that relationship. And that can have so many different forms, but I'll take just kind of more of like a classic one that maybe would be a little bit more stereotypical, which is, let's say, you have two people coming together and one person makes the money or makes more of the money and the other person does not, and the dependency and the power difference that creates, there has to be conscious negotiation and spelling out of what each person feels is just, fair, and right based on that one person is making most of the money or all of the money or a lot more than the other one, and the unspoken expectations that each person has based on their personal beliefs about what that says about the hierarchy of power dynamics within the relationship. And that is something that almost always goes unaddressed and ends up becoming a rearing dragon that comes and either bites your head off, the couple, or bites your ass and pulls you down until you address it, or the relationship disfigures, dismembers, and falls apart. It is an inevitable thing that has to be negotiated within every dynamic between two people, but you can see it very strongly in romantic relationship within partners.
I just wanted to bring attention to in that last example with Clarence Thomas and Anita Hill, we can really see, both sides of the Saturn-Neptune there. I'm not an expert in that situation, but it seems, you know, it, it seems like there was definitely something questionable going on there. And Clarence Thomas, got away with it and is continuing to do terrible things to our country. But that happening really uh, galvanized this movement and set something off. And especially right now, where we see, women under attack in so many ways today, not least around the right to choose. Um, I just want us to take the Saturn Neptune and try to hold both of those sides, that in all the ways that it's challenging us and testing our faith, it can really uh, be a goad and be a motivator for us to band together and to fight for these things that we believe in.
There's a few things I want to bring in that are going to be big themes that are up right now. So one really big Saturn Neptune theme is sleep. A lot of people are struggling with sleepless, restless nights, insomnia, or sleep being interrupted. This is common with Saturn Neptune, whether you're born with it or it's in the sky. It can be kind of one of the main things that someone struggles with. There are about 5 things that we know contribute to someone's overall wellness, and sleep, good quality of sleep, is one of those 5 things. So we know that it is eating mostly whole foods, getting good, deep, restful sleep, movement. We call it that instead of exercise. It's just movement. It doesn't matter what the movement is. That would be unique to you. Good quality relationships and or community of some kind. I can't remember what the 5th one is. Staying on top of your doctor's appointments if you can. How about that? So anyways, sleep ends up under Saturn Neptune being something that's difficult for a lot of us, but the reason why varies. So for some people, they're in sleep deprivation because of anxiety, or they're in sleep deprivation because of stress, or they have young children who aren't sleeping through the night yet, or there can be medical reasons for it. And this is something that's often overlooked and needs to be the first place that we look before trying to go into like a spiritual or psychosomatic exploration of it. Sometimes it actually has to do with constipation, which by definition actually doesn't have anything to do with whether or not you go take bowel movements on a regular basis. It actually has to do with the level of production of the bowel movements. So constipation actually means that you produce a lot of poop, and whether or not it comes out regularly or not is another story. But constipation after the age of 5 is considered a medical issue that can be addressed usually through things like a combination of diet and medication. It's a huge contributing factor to a lot of people who wake up in the night through night wakings. The older we get, the harder it is to not wake up in the night and go to the restroom. So there are different kind of sleep hygiene things that some of us can choose to do by being aware of things that contain both caffeine and that are diuretics. These are some of my PSAs because I feel like, being a pragmatic mystic, I need to say these things. First of all, a lot of people have caffeine later in the day. Travis has done medical market research in the past, and his mom has a business around this. And when it came to sleep medications, the doctors were asked, like, what's the number one thing you work with when you work with people around taking sleep medications like Ambien or Lunesta? And they ask people if they're willing to either stop drinking caffeine or stop drinking it after a certain time of the day. And usually people's answer is no. And so therefore they often do need a sleep agent to help support that. I recently talked to someone who ate chocolate before bed every night and didn't know that chocolate contains a high amount of caffeine in it, which is usually why we don't give it to children, because it is a stimulant. A lot of people don't realize that chocolate is a stimulant and can also create anxiety and heart palpitations. A lot of folks don't realize that diuretics include things like apples and prunes, or a lot of people don't realize that anything that dehydrates you, like alcohol, before bed, much more likely increases your chances of waking up in the night. A lot of people hydrate too late in the day. It's actually most often better if you get most of your hydration in the first half of the day, because then in the second half of the day, you're more likely to have to wake up and use the restroom and go pee more often. There's also some tips and tricks you can do to empty your bladder before bed. So for us, part of sleep hygiene is like, I don't really like to have any diuretics after, 6 p.m. dinner time. And then after that, I reduce my water intake, including tea, which oftentimes is a huge diuretic that makes you go pee or poop in the night. But once you decrease your liquid intake after a certain time, it's different for every person. Mine's an hour before bed, but I'm still, younger in life, so I can get away with it. Is for women, one way to empty your bladder is when you're done going pee, lean all the way forward and it squeezes out any remaining liquid so that then you don't have to go again. For men, I'll let Travis explain what something you can do there if you want, Travis. I've always liked to put Travis on the spot and make him talk about these things. Please, for me.
If you reach below your testicles and pull up on your perineum, that will help to empty out the last bit of liquid from your male bladder.
Thank you, Travis. We are pragmatic mystics here at Trust Psyche. So these are some things that can start to support what we call sleep hygiene. A lot of times people focus on things like screen time, and that may or may not be true for you. There's often other things that are going into it that we actually can do, practically speaking. Also, biorhythms and circadian rhythms. So, for example, you see this a lot with children. There's a great phrase that says early to bed, late to rise. With children, we see this with our daughter a lot, where if she goes to bed past her natural time that her body wants to go to sleep, her whole wake cycle will start over again, and it'll take a whole nother 2 hours for her to be ready to go to sleep. So for most young children, bedtime is somewhere between 6 and 7 p.m. And if you catch it at that place, they'll sleep 11 to 12 hours through the night. The same thing is true for adults. A lot of us, if we go to bed by a certain time, it catches from our brain restarting a wake cycle that then prolongs us from going to sleep. If we miss the initial sleep time to go to sleep, it makes it more likely to wake up in the night, and it makes it more likely to have nightmares. Saturn-Neptune also can very much relate to nightmares, bad dreams, night terrors. And so that's something that we often also see an increase of, that sometimes can happen, especially if there is unresolved anxiety, stress, or trauma, or if you're addressing it in something like therapy or whatever your healing modality is. Usually there's an increase in nightmares during a certain phase of the healing process. So I also want to say that it's really important with whatever we might be struggling with to first consider if it's medical before going into the Neptunian realm of, this is saying something spiritual, this has some kind of meaning for me, this is psychosomatic, this is because of this thing that I haven't purified yet, or whatever it is, when actually it might be you're constipated. And so like those things need to get addressed first before we go into Neptune's realm of trying to find the profound meaning of why maybe something's going on for us. I have some other PSAs, but maybe I'm going to take a little break from that since I can't see your faces or hear if you're smiling or squirming. So I can't really fully read the room. Take it away, Travis.
All right, I'll give another example here. So we kind of went through all the themes, and then the last two things I had on my list were more topic areas rather than themes. And so I had a few examples from the arts of Saturn-Neptune, give us a little bit of a different take on it. And then I had some things to say a little bit about Russian history. But I'll start with the arts. So in So in this case, I'm gonna give this series of examples where Saturn is doing a little bit of this emptying out and a sort of has its role as kind of an absence. And Neptune is taking on its sort of imaginative dimension of being a stand-in for the art itself. So here, the art is sort of being emptied out or negated in some way. And you'll see it's a little bit different in each case. So in 1881, we get the birth of Picasso and Breck, who are the creators of Cubism. And in the Cubist technique, we see this dissolving of space, a kind of Neptunian dissolution of the Saturnian parameters of manifestation. There's this kind of flattening of the subjects, and instead of this kind of perspective and 3D depth, you get these series of squares and circles. That's a kind of abstracting, simplifying, and purifying, really, of these shapes from the subject at hand. One cycle later, 1917, you get the birth of Dada. The Dada movement was influenced by the Cubists. They took on these techniques of geometric abstraction and collage. But Dada was really reacting to World War I and all of this kind of what they saw as senseless death. And artists from both sides of the war were getting together to present this kind of absurdist, kind of anti-art in a way. They were rejecting logic, rejecting reason, responding to what just seemed like the craziness of the war. With the only response they knew how, that was kind of an artistic scream of sorts. But again, this kind of anti-art, which is a sort of Saturnian negation of the Neptunian art. Another cycle later, in 53, you get the artist Robert Rauschenberg, who was influenced by both the Cubists and Dada. And the first piece of his, he does this series called the White Paintings. And what they are is really just canvases painted all white. And they seem to be nothing but a blank, empty canvas. But the idea is that the play of light and shadow upon the canvas, the perspective of the observer, all these very situational aspects create the art. So you have a kind of empty artistic piece that gets projected on top of. John Cage, a composer, was inspired by this work, collaborated with Rauschenberg a little bit. He created a piece of music that did something similar called 4 minutes and 33 seconds. And a pianist comes out on stage, opens the lid of the piano, and just sits there for 4 minutes and 33 seconds. And the idea is kind of, people shifting in their seats or, somebody coming in late, coughing. These are the kind of sonic landscape that creates the piece of music each time it's played, a kind of empty vessel that the art can fill up, a chalice even. And then lastly, in 89, on December 1st, they had their first annual Day Without Art. This was a nationwide protest against the effect of AIDS. So many artists in that period had been lost to AIDS. And so what they did is they got all these museums to participate, and they actually took down paintings. And so it was this, absence of Picasso's painting where it's supposed to be there in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which was the technique to draw attention to all of these deaths. And at this time, it was still, the epidemic was still kind of being ignored by mainstream culture. And this was a big turning point where mainstream culture finally did acknowledge and recognize the epidemic for what it was. And yeah, I wondered, all of those examples are interesting in themselves. And I also was turning over in my head how the similar question of a kind of Saturnian negation of the artistic Neptune is also at work in some of the censorship we see playing out. All of us just saw Jimmy Kimmel get pulled off the air. And that too seems to have this, Saturn-Neptune quality of silencing, of squashing that artistic imaginative voice.
It becomes really difficult in that sense around free speech. And, it turns out legally free speech does include pretty much everything up to a point of, and this is where it's supposed to stop, is if it incites violence or harassment. So if it puts a target on someone's back that then causes harassment or violence to them, then that's usually where it no longer is considered just free speech. But hate speech, oddly, is covered under free speech, right? And so it's very complex and nuanced there. But as far as Saturn, Neptune, and the arts go, yeah, it's a huge piece of who gets to say what is art and what's not. Saturn is the pronouncement of judgment and rules and law. And so the demarcation of what is considered okay and not okay, what is art, what is not art.
All right, so just to say a few words about the Russian history topic that we didn't actually have time to get to in the talk. I'm splicing in a few minutes. I did not get a haircut mid-lecture, just dropping this in after the fact. So Russian history has real interesting correlations with the Saturn-Neptune. We don't have time to go through all of Russian history, but it goes all the way back to like 482, for example, was the year of the legendary founding of Kiev, the capital of Ukraine. Of course, very up in the question of Russia right now, 2025, 2026. But if we go back to our kind of 4-year examples, we can even skip ahead of it a little bit. First, Karl Marx is born in 1818. His natal chart has the Saturn-Neptune trine. And Marx and Engels publish the Communist Manifesto in 1848, one cycle before that 1883 that we've been talking about. Of course, the Communist Manifesto is going to be connected to this theme of popular uprisings that we mentioned, the fall of empires. So the very next cycle after 1848, 1883, that is the year that Karl Marx dies. And it's also the year that Tsar Alexander II is assassinated by this group called the People's Will, another one of these popular uprisings setting instability into the Tsardom, which causes these backlashes. But then one cycle later, in 1917 cycle, that's going to be the time when the Bolsheviks bring the Russian Revolution, inspired by that Communist Manifesto, written a couple cycles before. So that's going to be the end of Tsarist Russia, the beginning of communist Russia, fall of one empire, rise of another, popular uprising and revolt. One cycle later, and I should mention there, that 1917 one, you recall that I'd mentioned under the topic of paranoia, that was when the first Red Scare happened. Everyone started to freak out about communism in the States with the rise of this new communist empire. So one cycle later, we get the second Red Scare under McCarthy, everything that happened with the Rosenbergs. And so this is the early Cold War. Under this one, Stalin dies, the former strong, great leader of Russia. And at that same time, under the same cycle, Vladimir Putin, the current leader of Russia, is born. One cycle after that, we get, that'll be in 1989, after the 1953 cycle, when Stalin died and Putin was born. We get the dissolution of the Soviet Union. We mentioned this earlier when we talked about the fall of the Berlin Wall as this very physical symbol of a barrier being dissolved, and the dissolving of this second empire that had overtaken Tsarist Russia before that. This marks the end of the Cold War. 1989 cycle, one cycle after that brings us to the present, where Russia is so much in the news now in this question of the war with Ukraine, and again, a question of empires at war rising and falling.
I'm gonna kind of pivot here into the last bit, and then we'll open it up here in a minute. And I just want to get some of these really beautiful sides of Saturn, Neptune, and end on that note. Saturn Neptune is a temple of creative devotion. At its best, it is prostration and prayer that is very humble and open to receiving messages of guidance that are filled with love, and healing. They're compassionate containers that hold all of us, especially our humanity. It's a seeing through the delusion and the deception and the denial, which is very painful, but ultimately trying to bring us into deeper levels of truth that hopefully ultimately set us free in the long run. And even though there's a testing of faith and at times a doubting of the divine, it very much is a devotional call into a higher sense of meaning and purpose that anchors and tethers us in the darkest of nights. It asks us to come into sacred service, where we learn to heal together by showing up and supporting one another to get us out of our separation and isolationism. In its nature or ontology, it's the nature of the divine dramatized through the human experience, where the human embodiment is the pivot of the divine, and the divine gets to see itself play out through human form, expression, dramatization, and creation, which is a holy and sacred act. It's the ability to bow to our own divinity and therefore to have deep self-respect and therefore be able to bow to one another's divinity and have respect for one another. It's the soul truth and the process of soul making that does include going through layers of pain and suffering, but it's also very much what makes us better versions of ourselves. And through each Saturn-Neptune conjunction, humanity is faced with a moral crisis, a morality testing of what our shared vision is for being on this planet and how we actually want to live together and coexist and move forward as a species. It is deeply tested and shook to the core almost every time, but it's also a process of maturation, not just spiritually, but again, pragmatically, seen in the Saturnian form of our policies, our rules, and our governance, a governance of the people, by the people, for the people. It also very much is a time where we get to profess our faith and we get to practice choosing to return to the most simple truth of all, which is it really is about love versus fear and control. Though it can create a spiritual fatigue and a sense of being burnt out, as someone recently said, I now swallow my toothpaste. Who gives a fuck anymore? Why does it matter? Why should I recycle? Why should I do right? Why should I even bother? And though that is genuinely a part of the Saturn-Neptune, and we do go there because we're human, it's also realizing that we have a choice to keep choosing what we think is right, just, and good, because it's the kind thing to do. And I'll end with this, which is I'd much rather live in a world where we're connected than disconnected. And if there's anything that I can personally do to help cultivate deeper connection, I'll do my best to do it. And from what I've seen in my life and hearing you guys speak and having the privilege of bearing witness to suffering and healing every day and raising my 2 children, is that it really is a choice to choose to move towards what feels good than to move towards what feels bad. There are a million moments in just one single day where we get to make those choices. Part of the way in which the above knows that the below, and I'm not saying here God and us, when the people at the top know that the best way to pit us against each other is by making us afraid of each other, that is when we have all of the horrific atrocities that Saturn-Neptune can be and is in the world today. And this is my plea for all of us to remember that that is a false narrative. I choose personally not to believe or participate in anything that tells me otherwise. Yeah, I would be remiss if I didn't just give these 4 PSAs. I'm not going to go into the details, but these are just things that have made my life better, and they might make yours or someone you know better. If you're going to have a child, or you know someone who's going to have a child and sleep matters to them, the book 12 weeks, 12 hours of sleep by 12 weeks changed my life. Both our children sleep through the night. That book sets up the best chance for a human being to have good sleep health for the rest of their life. You can use the principles in that book for any age, but it's meant to be able to give you the best chance to have your child be sleeping through the night by 3 months old, which did work for us when we followed the book, which was recommended to me by another therapist who has 5 kids, and it worked for all 5 of her kids. If you're in the United States and you have student loan debt, check out Student Loan Tutor. They're phenomenal. I've used them for years. I recommend them to everybody. There is absolutely no reason why you need to be paying money off to your student loans that could be there to take care of you and your loved ones right now when money is tight for so many. Student Loan Tutor, tell them I sent you. If you believe that you or someone in your life is neurodivergent and you would like support around that, I recommend checking out the work of Andy Putt, P-U-T-T, from Mrs. Speech and P, Meaningful Speech, and potentially PDA of North America. PDA is a subtype of autism. It's harder to recognize, and it's very important that we support it. And something lastly called low demand parenting for anybody who feels stressed out, dysregulated as a parent. You do not need to have a neurodivergent child for these techniques to work. It pretty much removes unnecessary demands and expectations that are keeping you from being present and loving and unconditionally loving with yourself and your children. Highly recommend that. I totally forgot it was an eclipse until you just said that. That's how this all started. I think it's officially over. Let's call it there. The eclipse. It's done, right? If we just say it's done, it's over.
Exactly. It's over.
But yeah, we all just went through an eclipse together, wildly. And you can think closely next time about whether or not you want to eclipse portal with me or not. But I'll end with this. In general, and thanks for that, Bill, eclipses turn up the volume on whatever's happening. The other transits that are going on in the sky, it turns up the volume. In this case, Saturn-Neptune. Just because it's an eclipse while Saturn-Neptune's happening, but in this case, it's opposite exactly the Saturn-Neptune. So it's really turning up the volume on it. But eclipses amplify, magnify, and turn up the volume with whatever's happening in our lives when they happen. So whatever's happening in your life right now, what that eclipse medicine is for you, which is how I like to think of it, is the volume is turned up as an opportunity to like really be with whatever that is. And so we're going to return back to the beginning as we close up here, which is for those of you who set an intention for the ritual we just enacted, I just want you to kind of bring that back into your center of awareness now and just be with it and see if there's anything else there in that for you that you want to either carry with you after we're done here today or let go of more so you don't carry it with you. And just to take a moment here and for all of us just to tune in on that and what I proposed at the beginning of this, which was double down on the things that matter most and double out on the things that don't. So I'm going to double down on what's working for me right now. I'm going to lean into that with some elbow grease. And I'm going to fucking take the biggest cosmic shit of all the shit that is not working and flush it out. And I'm just going to take a moment to feel that. Thank you so much for being here with us today. It's an honor. It's a pleasure. It's a joy for us. We always love to hear from you here, Travis and I at Trust Psyche. You ever feel called to be in touch with us, send us an email, whatever it is, we're here. No question too big or small, comment, whatever it is. If you want to stay more connected with us more often on social media, Trust.Psyche on Instagram, our YouTube channel, Trust Psyche. And Travis, the lovely Travis here, what you didn't see was he had about, I don't know how many pages of notes of correlations throughout all of history. He shared about 1% of it with you today, but he's also a phenomenal astrologer and he gives readings if you feel called to dive more into the Saturn-Neptune in your chart or anything at all. You can always reach out to him at travis@trustpsyche.com. And yeah, love you guys. Thank you. Take good care of yourselves, and we'll see you next time.